what we are seeing is that for Q3, on a sequential basis, we are seeing some flattening out in terms of revenues, such as the headline numbers that we saw out of SABIC, for example, in Saudi Arabia. But in general, we do expect that 2023 is a challenging year for the commodity chemicals. So this is why we actually expect revenue declines for the companies that we rate of between 20 to 30% this year compared to the same period last year. And we expect the recovery from 2024 onwards. And this is mainly because of, on the supply side, the capacity additions that are coming on stream, particularly from China and Asia in general, are expected to be completed by the first half of next year. So clearly that should relieve some sort of pressure on the supply side. And then from the demand side, we are seeing an overall muted macroeconomic environment, which is also playing a role in terms of the pricing. So in our forecast for the companies that we rate in the region, we do expect some sort of recovery from next year, particularly from the second half of next year onwards. But maybe just to add to that is that the regional chemical companies that we rate are largely benefiting from a low-cost competitive position. So clearly this is helping in terms of the resilience of their operations compared to other international peers that we look at. Just to give a bit of numbers, I think for SABIC's Q3 rolling 12 months EBITDA margins were around 15-16%, which compares to, for example, BASF and LyondellBasell of around 12 to 13%. So even with pressure on pricing and higher cost inflation, which is impacting profitability, we do think that the companies that we look at in the region in the chemical sector to be benefiting from low-cost feedstock advantages and long-term feedstock contracts.
بجانب مخاطر أسعار النفط على قطاع البتروكيماويات، ما هو نوع المخاطر الأخرى التي قد تواجهها هذا القطاع؟
What we're looking at is that I think the recent geopolitical tensions with Russia-Ukraine, I think, had highlighted the question of not only feedstock availability, but also feedstock affordability. So clearly in Europe, for example, we're seeing some companies that are closing down certain plants because of the lack of affordability. And I think the regional companies, so for example, that we look at where the majority of the assets are in the region, are definitely benefiting from this feedstock advantage. But definitely also cost inflation is also playing a role on profitability in general.
ما هي أهم المبادرات التي اتخذها قطاع البتروكيماويات فيما يخص الاستدامة والمناخ؟
So I think maybe to start with, in general, chemical companies or the sector is highly exposed to both climate transition risk, but also pollution and prevention and control. And these are two main factors that are material to the sector. In the region, we're looking that these companies or the large players in the sector are aligning their strategies with their national sustainability targets and overall national determined contributions. So what we're seeing is that, for example, we are seeing initiatives on renewable energy, for example, increasing the capacity for certain companies. We are looking at energy efficiency, but also we're looking at low carbon feedstock. So for example, IQ has the blue ammonia train that it's working on, which is publicly announced. So there are a lot of initiatives. Some of these are in the region, but also others are abroad. So for example, we highlight, for example, SABIC is partnering with Linde and BASF on a trial for electrification of a stream cracker, which the process might even reduce the greenhouse gas emissions through this process by up to 90%. So clearly there are initiatives, but in the short to medium term, we don't expect this to have meaningful impact on cash flow or on their operations, at least in the short to medium term.
كيف تجدين اهتمام الحكومات الخليجية بممارسات ومعايير الESG وانعكاساتها على الاستدامة في اقتصادها؟
So I think to start with, there's a lot of discussions on the net zero commitment, the national sustainability targets, and we think that this is largely driving the issuances in the space in the region. So maybe just to give a few numbers, in the Middle East in general, during the first 9 months of the year, the green, social, sustainable and sustainability-linked bonds reached 19.4 billion this year, which is slightly more than 4 times the levels recorded during the same period last year. And this is largely driven by the government initiatives and also coming from a relatively low base. So just for clarity, the largest issuers are the GCC governments and the large government-related entities. Particularly in Saudi Arabia, for example, about 70-71% of the issuances in green, social, sustainable and sustainability-linked bonds were coming from the PIF, which is the government. So it speaks to that as well.